The fire of Byzantium was never meant to impress. It did not roar, rush, or demand attention. It waited. Along the quiet waters of the Bosphorus, in a city built to endure rather than conquer, a guarded knowledge passed softly from one generation to the next. It was not written into law, carved into stone, or displayed in triumph. It existed only in memory, discipline, and patience. This is not a story of sudden invention or dramatic moments. It is the story of time, calm preparation, and a fire that learned to move slowly, just like the empire that protected it. Constantinople rests quietly at the narrow meeting place of water and wind. To the north, the Black Sea sends its steady currents. To the south, the Mediterranean breathes more warmly. Between them lies the Bosphorus, calm and watchful, carrying ships with the same patience it has shown for centuries. By day, the city moves with order. Markets open without rush. Clerks record figures in measured lines. Ships arrive, unload, and depart again, guided by routine rather than urgency. Stone streets absorb the sound of footsteps that have learned the pace of repetition. Nothing presses forward too quickly. Nothing lingers unnecessarily. By night, Constantinople becomes something else entirely. Lamps glow along the harbor, reflected in the water like long, gentle threads of light. The sea touches the docks with a soft, regular rhythm. Wind moves between pale stone walls, cooling them slowly, evenly. The city does not sleep deeply, but it rests with awareness, as though accustomed to remaining present even in stillness. This was the nature of the Eastern Roman Empire. It survived not by sudden strength, but by careful continuity. While borders shifted and powers elsewhere rose and faded, Constantinople remained anchored. It understood the value of time. It understood how to wait. The empire's strength did not always appear in open display. Much of it existed quietly, embedded in habits, systems, and knowledge passed on without ceremony. Roads were maintained, harbors were measured, schedules were followed. Even defense was shaped by restraint rather than excess. Among the many things kept within this disciplined world, there was one knowledge guarded more carefully than imperial decrees. It was not announced, it was not celebrated, it was never meant to be admired. It was kept small. It was kept quiet. It was kept precise. This knowledge did not belong to the crowds of the hippodrome or the busy halls of administration. It lived instead in workshops closed to casual visitors, in conversations spoken slowly and never repeated widely. It traveled from instructor to apprentice, from one trusted hand to the next, without written record. Later generations would give it a name. They would call it Greek fire. But within the empire itself, it was never treated as legend. It was treated as a tool, a controlled one. Greek fire did not emerge from a single moment of inspiration. It did not arrive as a sudden solution. Its development followed the same rhythm as the city that protected it. Gradual, patient, methodical. In the centuries following the founding of Constantinople, the empire faced increasing pressure along its maritime routes. The Mediterranean, once a nearly unified Roman space, became more complex. Trade continued, but it shared the water with unfamiliar fleets. Movement across the sea required closer attention, not panic. Byzantine naval planners did not respond with spectacle. They observed patterns. They noted winds, currents, distances, and timing. They studied how ships approached, how they turned, how long they stayed near the coast. Defense, in this empire was a matter of understanding motion rather than overpowering it. Within this environment, experimentation took place. Materials already familiar, oils, resins, minerals, were combined and tested, not recklessly but carefully. Small adjustments were made, results were noted and remembered. What worked was retained. What did not was quietly set aside. There were no public demonstrations, no announcements of progress. Greek fire was never meant to define the empire's identity. It existed only to support its continuity. Its use required discipline. The substance itself demanded careful handling. Storage, transport, and application all followed strict routines. Nothing was left to improvisation. Nothing depended on emotion or impulse. Specialized siphons, often mounted on ships, allowed the substance to be projected with precision. These devices were not decorative. They were functional, built to fit seamlessly into the structure of Byzantine vessels. Crews trained not for speed, but for coordination. Every movement had a place. Every step followed the one before it. The empire's approach to this technology reflected its broader worldview. Power was not something to be displayed endlessly. It was something to be preserved and applied only when necessary. Greek fire was rarely mentioned because it was rarely needed. Secrecy was maintained not through fear, but through routine. Those entrusted with the knowledge lived ordinary lives. They worked within defined roles. Their skill was part of their profession, not a source of public status. By keeping the knowledge unremarkable, the empire ensured its survival. As years passed, other powers became aware that Byzantium possessed an unusual capability at sea. They observed its effects without understanding its source. Attempts were made elsewhere to recreate similar substances, but without the same conditions, geographical, institutional, cultural. The results remained incomplete. Greek fire was not only a formula, it was the outcome of a system that valued patience, repetition, and quiet control. It belonged to a city that knew how to remain still while the world shifted around it. In Constantinople, life continued as usual. Merchants calculated weights, sailors repaired rigging, administrators adjusted schedules. The harbor remained busy by day and calm by night. Greek fire stayed where it belonged, in reserve. It did not seek attention. It did not demand explanation. It existed, ready but restrained. And so, as we begin this slow journey through the history of Greek fire, we do so in the same manner the Byzantines themselves would have preferred, calmly, without urgency, allowing time to carry the story forward, one steady moment at a time. An empire of sea and time. After the year 330, when Constantinople was formally named the new capital of the Eastern Roman Empire, the city did something unexpected. It slowed down. This was not the pause of uncertainty and not the stillness of decline. It was the calm settling of a place that had decided it did not need to rush anymore. Rome had once expanded outward with great energy. Constantinople chose a different approach. It stayed where it was and focused on balance. The city no longer measured success by how far it could reach in a single season. Instead, it measured success by how well things continued to function, day after day, year after year, without disruption. Streets were maintained, harbors were organized, records were kept neatly. Nothing dramatic needed to happen for the empire to feel secure. At the center of this steady world was the sea. The waters around Constantinople were not treated as a boundary. They were treated as a shared space, almost like an extra set of streets made of water. The Bosphorus, the Golden Horn, and the surrounding seas formed a living network that connected the city to trade routes, supply lines, and communication paths stretching across the Mediterranean. Ships came and went with dependable regularity. In the morning, sails rose slowly, catching the light breeze. By evening, those same sails were folded with care, stacked neatly and tied down. Wood dried in the sun, then darkened again with spray. Ropes were coiled, uncoiled, and coiled again. Everything followed a rhythm that did not change very much from one week to the next. The Byzantine fleet was not designed to impress spectators. It was designed to work. Ships were built to last, not to shine. Crews learned their tasks through repetition rather than excitement. No one shouted unnecessarily. No one hurried without reason. In this empire, the sea was not something to be conquered. It was something to be understood. Sailors knew the behavior of the water in different seasons. They recognized how winds shifted throughout the year. They learned when currents moved gently and when they preferred to be left alone. This knowledge was practical, quiet, and deeply respected. The Navy, as a result, became a natural extension of the city itself. Just as Constantinople had gates, roads, and walls, it also had ships that moved with the same sense of order. The fleet was simply the city continuing outward, floating calmly beyond the shoreline. During the 4th, 5th, and 6th centuries, this approach proved remarkably effective. While other regions experienced frequent changes in leadership, borders, or priorities, Constantinople focused on consistency. Officials changed roles without disrupting systems. Schedules remained familiar. Procedures stayed reliable. Even military preparation followed this tone. Training emphasized coordination over speed. Crews practiced movements until they became second nature. The goal was not excitement, but smooth execution. A well-trained sailor in Byzantine thinking was one who could perform the same task correctly every time, even when slightly bored. And boredom, it turns out, can be very useful. Because when people are not distracted by spectacle, they notice details. A loose fitting, a rope beginning to fray, a storage container that needs a better seal. These small observations added up to something larger, an empire that quietly reduced mistakes. The sea rewarded this mindset. Trade continued steadily. Supplies arrived on time. Communication across water remained reliable. Constantinople became not just a capital, but a hub where movement flowed without urgency. The empire did not try to impress the sea with bold gestures. It showed respect instead. And the sea responded by allowing passage, most of the time, without trouble. This long relationship with water shaped how the Byzantines thought about defense as well. Protection was not about constant action, it was about readiness. Ships were maintained even when they were not needed. Equipment was stored carefully, checked often, and used sparingly. Nothing was wasted, especially not effort. Within this calm structure, innovation took place quietly. New ideas were tested slowly, adjusted carefully, and evaluated without drama. If something worked, it was kept. If it did not, it was quietly forgotten. No announcements were necessary. This was the environment in which certain specialized knowledge began to take form. Not as a bold invention meant to change everything at once, but as a gradual refinement of existing practices. It fit naturally into a culture that valued patience and restraint. At no point did the empire feel the need to advertise its capabilities. There was no expectation that others needed to understand what Constantinople could do. What mattered was that the city itself remained stable. And so, life continued at an even pace. Merchants counted goods, sailors adjusted sails, shipwrights repaired hulls with familiar tools, administrators recorded arrivals and departures in careful handwriting. The sea kept moving, the city kept breathing. The Eastern Roman Empire was not trying to be unforgettable, it was trying to be unmovable, and in doing so it laid the groundwork for tools and techniques that matched this philosophy perfectly. Tools that did not rush, techniques that worked best when used calmly, knowledge that stayed useful precisely because it stayed quiet. This was an empire built not on sudden flames, but on steady warmth. Not on noise, but on timing. Not on showing strength, but on knowing when strength was truly needed. The sea understood this. And for centuries, it carried Constantinople forward, one slow, reliable crossing at a time. Slow-moving pressures. As the 6th century unfolded, the Mediterranean Sea began to feel slightly different. Not louder, not chaotic, just busier. The familiar routes were still there, traced again and again by merchant ships and supply vessels that followed well-known paths, but alongside them appeared new movements. Fleets that did not belong to the usual rhythm began to pass through the wider waters. They did not arrive all at once, and they did not announce themselves with spectacle. They simply appeared, returned, and appeared again. Each year, the change was small, almost polite. From the harbors of Constantinople, these movements looked distant and unhurried. No sudden alarms echoed through the city. No urgent decrees interrupted daily routines. The empire had seen change before, and it had learned that not every shift required immediate action. Instead of reacting strongly, the imperial court did what it did best. It observed. Officials watched reports arrive from coastal regions. They compared notes. They placed documents side by side and noticed patterns forming slowly, like ripples spreading across water after a stone has already sunk. Maps were adjusted, not dramatically, just carefully. Coastlines were redrawn with slightly finer detail. Islands were measured again, not because they had moved, but because understanding them more precisely never hurt anyone. Routes were traced in softer ink, allowing room for correction later. Nothing was finalized too quickly. The Byzantines preferred drafts. Wind patterns became a frequent topic of quiet discussion. Sailors shared observations that had once seemed too ordinary to mention. A breeze that lingered longer than expected. A current that shifted a little earlier in the season. None of these details caused concern on their own, but together they formed a picture worth keeping. Tide schedules were reviewed and refined. Tables were updated, margins filled with small notes, written in careful handwriting. Someone always checked the numbers again just to be sure. The sea was reliable, but it appreciated respect. This attention to detail was not dramatic, but it was deeply intentional. The empire understood that pressure does not always arrive loudly. Sometimes it arrives by repetition. A ship today, another next month. A slightly larger group the following year. Nothing rushed, nothing obvious. From the outside, Constantinople appeared calm, almost indifferent. Inside, however, its systems were quietly adjusting. This was not fear, it was preparation. In workshops scattered throughout the city, often near the water but never directly on display, artisans continued their daily work. Metal was shaped, wood was treated, containers were sealed and resealed. These were ordinary tasks, performed by people who had done them many times before. And then gradually, something new entered the routine. Not a finished invention, not even a clear idea. Just experiments. Certain materials were tested together. Oils that had long been used for practical purposes were mixed in different proportions. Resins were warmed gently, then cooled again. Substances were stirred slowly, then left to rest, as if allowed to think about their role. No one labeled these mixtures with impressive names. Most were not labeled at all. If something failed to behave as expected, it was noted calmly and set aside. No disappointment followed. There was always another attempt, scheduled for later. Time was generous in this empire, and mistakes were simply part of the process. The workshops remained quiet, conversations stayed practical, measurements were repeated, tools were cleaned at the end of each day. Nothing about this work suggested urgency or excitement. In fact, excitement was considered unhelpful. The goal was not to create something astonishing. The goal was to create something dependable. Meanwhile, life in the city continued uninterrupted. Markets. The presence of unfamiliar fleets did not dominate conversation. Most citizens barely noticed. Those who did notice trusted that someone, somewhere, was already paying attention. And they were correct. The Byzantine court understood that maintaining stability often meant doing less, not more. Large gestures invited unnecessary attention. Quiet readiness, on the other hand, allowed flexibility. So the empire continued to observe. Reports arrived from the Western Mediterranean, then from the eastern routes. Each report was read, filed, and compared with earlier ones. No single document changed policy. Patterns mattered more than moments. This approach required patience, and patience was something Byzantium had in abundance. As the 6th century gave way to the 7th, the slow pressure continued. It never became overwhelming. It simply remained present, like a low tide that refused to fully recede. In response, the empire did not announce new doctrines or strategies. It refined existing ones. The navy trained steadily. Equipment was maintained more carefully than before. Storage practices were improved. Containers were tested for durability and sealing. And in those same workshops, experimentation continued. Some mixtures proved too unstable. Others were difficult to control. A few showed promise but required better delivery methods. Each result added to a growing body of practical knowledge that existed nowhere on paper, but very clearly in practice. This knowledge stayed close to those who needed it, not out of paranoia, but out of efficiency. Too many voices complicate things. Byzantium preferred clarity. There was no rush to deploy anything new. Readiness did not mean immediate use. It meant having options available if they were ever required. The empire had learned long ago that the sea rewarded preparation more than enthusiasm. Ships that were well maintained sailed better, crews that practiced calmly worked better, tools that were understood deeply performed more reliably. Whatever was taking shape in those workshops would need to fit into this philosophy. It would need to work without drama. It would need to function within the existing rhythms of ship, sea, and sailor. Nothing flashy would survive long in this environment. And so the slow-moving pressures of the Mediterranean continued to drift across the horizon. The empire watched. It adjusted. It refined. No panic entered the process. No urgency disturbed the rhythm. Instead, Byzantium did what it had always done best. It stayed still enough to notice change. It moved slowly enough to respond wisely. By the end of this period, something important had taken shape. Not yet a weapon, not yet a defined tool, but a foundation. A quiet understanding that certain challenges required equally quiet solutions. Solutions that would not announce themselves. Solutions that would not rush. Solutions that would wait patiently, just like the city itself. And so the sea kept moving. The fleets came and went. The workshops remained closed and orderly. The empire continued to breathe at its own pace. What would eventually emerge from this careful observation was not designed for spectacle. It was designed to work. Slowly, reliably, and only when needed. The slow arrival of Greek fire. The hour settles into a quieter rhythm now, like a workshop late at night when the doors are closed and the city outside has decided to whisper instead of speak. In this stretch of time, nothing appears suddenly. Nothing announces itself with trumpets or applause. What takes shape does so gently, through repetition, patience, and a great deal of careful waiting. Greek fire does not enter history as a dramatic invention with a precise birthday. There is no single afternoon when someone clapped their hands and said, "Yes, that's it." Instead, it grows slowly, the way a habit grows, or the way a path becomes visible, only after many feet have passed over the same ground. In the early years of the 7th century, workshops along the eastern Mediterranean coast remain busy, but unhurried. Oil lamps burn steadily. Their light does not flicker wildly. It is the dependable kind of light, the sort that allows hands to work without strain. Shelves hold jars with modest labels. Some jars are unlabeled entirely, which suits everyone just fine. Here, experimentation is quiet. Someone adjusts a mixture by a small amount, then waits. Someone else notes how long it behaves the same way before changing. No one rushes. Rushing has never improved a careful mixture, and everyone present seems to know that instinctively. The process is simple in structure, though slow in practice. Try, observe, adjust, repeat. Days pass. Weeks slide into months. Years follow with soft footsteps. Each attempt leaves behind a faint lesson, like a chalk mark on stone that will be brushed away later but remembered all the same. There are no official announcements about what is happening in these rooms. No scrolls circulate with detailed instructions. Nothing is nailed to a wall. Knowledge moves in a much quieter way from one person to another, spoken calmly and remembered carefully. The fewer words used, the better. Those who are trusted to learn are chosen not for their loud opinions or dramatic gestures, but for their ability to listen. They listen to instructions. They listen to the behavior of materials. They listen to silence too, which turns out to be surprisingly informative. The mixture that will later be known as Greek fire does not behave like ordinary flame, and that difference becomes clear only after long observation. It does not hurry. It does not leap about seeking attention. Instead, it does its work steadily, almost politely, as if it understands the value of timing. Someone notices that it performs best when not forced. Someone else notes that it prefers consistency over excitement. These observations are not written down in grand language. They are remembered in the body, in the hands, in the habit of doing things a certain way. By the middle of the 7th century, the process has become smoother. Fewer surprises occur. The mixture behaves predictably when treated with respect. It becomes clear that this is not something to show off, but something to handle quietly, correctly, and only when appropriate. The formula itself remains elusive, not because it is complicated, but because it is guarded by habit rather than secrecy alone. No one speaks of it openly, not because they are fearful, but because there is simply no need. The knowledge lives comfortably where it is. Even among those involved, discussions remain brief. A nod replaces a paragraph. A raised eyebrow replaces a lecture. When words are used, they are practical and calm, describing actions rather than theories. Time in these workshops moves differently. Outside, ships come and go, markets open and close. Inside, the same lamp is refilled again and again, its flame steady, patient, never in a hurry to burn brighter than necessary. There is something faintly humorous about how unexciting the work appears from the outside. Anyone peeking in might expect drama, and instead find a group of people quietly measuring, waiting, and occasionally adjusting a lid that is slightly off-center. At some point, someone jokes softly that the mixture seems to prefer good manners. If treated roughly, it refuses to cooperate. If approached calmly, it behaves beautifully. The joke is not written down, but it is remembered. And the habit of gentle handling becomes part of the process. The transmission of this knowledge follows the same tone. New participants are brought in slowly. They are shown, not overwhelmed. They are given small tasks first, learning the rhythm before learning the details. It is understood that understanding comes from repetition, not explanation. No official document ever captures the process in full. Not because it could not be written, but because writing would freeze something that is meant to remain flexible. Small adjustments continue, responding to materials, conditions, and experience. Greek fire at this stage is not a symbol or a legend. It is simply a working solution that performs its role quietly. It does not need a name yet. Names tend to attract attention, and attention is unnecessary. As the years pass, the mixture becomes more reliable, not louder, not more dramatic, just more consistent. That consistency becomes its greatest strength, even if no one says so out loud. By the late 7th century, the method is refined enough that mistakes are rare. When they do occur, they are handled without fuss. Someone cleans a surface, someone adjusts a ratio, the lamp is refilled, the work continues. The absence of written records becomes a feature rather than a flaw. Knowledge passed by memory stays alive. It adapts, it breathes, it remains practical instead of theoretical. Those who carry this knowledge do not consider themselves inventors. They think of themselves more as caretakers. They are keeping something steady, making sure it behaves the same way tomorrow as it does today. Outside the workshop, life moves along at its usual pace. Inside, time feels padded, softened, like footsteps on a thick rug. Hours pass unnoticed. The mixture rests when it needs to rest. Nothing is rushed. There is no sense of destiny in the room. No one believes they are changing the world. They are simply doing their work well, which, in their view, is quite enough. Occasionally, someone chuckles at the idea that future generations might imagine dramatic scenes filled with urgency and excitement. If only they could see the reality. A quiet room, steady light, and people who value patience above all else. As this section of time draws to a close, Greek fire exists fully but modestly. It has found its place without fanfare. It waits calmly, ready when needed, content to remain unnoticed most of the time. And in that stillness, the mixture seems almost satisfied, resting in sealed containers, behaving exactly as expected, never demanding attention. Just doing what it was patiently taught to do over many quiet years. Under steady oil lamps, in rooms where silence is not empty, but useful. Technology paired with restraint. As this hour begins, everything slows a little more, as if the empire itself has decided to sit back in a sturdy chair and breathe evenly. This is not the time for invention in a hurry, nor for tools used on a whim. What exists now has already been tested, adjusted, and quietly accepted into a careful rhythm. Greek fire is present, but it is not eager. It is not something people reach for casually, like a favorite cup or a familiar cloak. Instead, it rests in the background, acknowledged but rarely disturbed. In this empire, usefulness is never confused with constant use. Here, restraint is not a weakness. It is a form of skill. The idea is simple and repeated often, though never loudly. Some tools are meant to remain still most of the time. Greek fire belongs firmly in that category. It is understood as a final option, not a daily habit. Like a well-made umbrella kept near the door, it is reassuring to know it is there, even when the sky looks perfectly calm. The ships that carry this technology do not advertise it. From a distance, they appear ordinary enough. Wooden hulls resting on water, sails folded with care, ropes coiled neatly. Nothing about them suggests urgency or excess. Everything suggests preparation. At the bow of certain ships, bronze tubes are fitted with precision. They are compact, balanced, and polished, just enough to reflect lamplight without showing off. Bronze, after all, is a practical material. It does not demand attention, it simply does its job and ages gracefully. These tubes are not large. They do not dominate the ship's shape. They fit neatly into place, as if they were always meant to be there. The design favors order over drama, clarity over complexity. Installation follows a precise sequence. One step leads calmly into the next. Nothing is skipped. Nothing is added for flair. Each person involved knows their role and performs it without commentary. The absence of conversation is not awkward. It is efficient. No one rushes these preparations. Rushing is seen as unnecessary and faintly suspicious. If someone moves too quickly, others gently slow them down, often with a raised hand or a soft clearing of the throat. Speed is not impressive here. Accuracy is. The bronze tubes are checked, then checked again. Not because anyone expects a problem, but because repetition builds trust. Trust, in this context, is worth more than excitement. What stands out most is how ordinary the process feels. There is no sense of danger in the room, no tension thickening the air, just steady movement, quiet coordination, and the occasional pause to make sure everything remains aligned. Greek fire itself remains contained, calm, and patient. It does not resist restraint. In fact, it seems to prefer it. Stored properly, handled sparingly, it behaves exactly as expected. Excess use would only complicate matters, and complication is not admired here. In the broader structure of the empire, this philosophy repeats itself. Technology is not celebrated for its novelty, but for its discipline. A tool is judged by how well it integrates into an existing system, not by how loudly it announces itself. Even engineers speak modestly about their work. When asked about the bronze tubes, one might shrug and say they are suitable. Another might add that they fit well. High praise indeed. There is a gentle humor in how underwhelming the language is. Anyone hoping for dramatic descriptions will be disappointed. The empire prefers understatement. If something works reliably, that is enough. Training reflects the same values. Those responsible for operating the equipment learn slowly, step by step. No one is overwhelmed with information. No one is tested through stress. Instead, routines are repeated until they become second nature. Mistakes, when they occur, are treated calmly. A correction is made, the sequence resumes. There is no scolding, no raised voices. Errors are simply part of learning, not a cause for alarm. One instructor is known for saying, "If you remember the order, the rest will follow." He says this often, and it seems to apply to more than just machinery. It becomes a quiet motto for the entire process. The ships themselves reflect this mindset. Everything aboard has a place. Nothing rattles unnecessarily. Even the sound of footsteps feels measured, as though the decks appreciate consistency. At sea, preparations remain minimal. The bronze tubes are not constantly adjusted or admired. They remain still, secured, and out of the way. Crew members pass by without glancing at them, which is exactly the point. Greek fire in this setting becomes less an object and more a condition. It exists as potential rather than presence. Its strength lies in restraint, not repetition. There is something faintly amusing about how much effort is invested in not using something, but the logic is sound. A tool that remains unused stays dependable. A tool used too often becomes unpredictable. Within the empire's administrative circles, this approach is quietly praised. Reports mention readiness, not action. Preparedness, not display. Calm language fills the pages. Even the maintenance schedules are unremarkable. Inspections occur at regular intervals. Adjustments are minor. Notes are brief. No one dramatizes the process. This is technology that respects time. It does not demand constant attention. It waits. As the years pass, this balance between capability and restraint becomes a defining feature. The empire does not chase novelty. It refines what it already understands. The bronze tubes age gently, their surfaces darkening slightly, acquiring a quiet dignity. They do not need polishing every day. A little wear is acceptable. It shows they belong. Those who work closest with this technology develop a calm confidence. They are not proud in the loud sense. They are comfortable. Comfort here is earned through consistency. Occasionally, someone jokes that the equipment is so well behaved, it might forget how to do anything dramatic at all. The joke is appreciated, then forgotten, much like most jokes in a well-ordered system. As this hour drifts toward its end, the lesson settles clearly but softly. Power paired with patience remains stable. Technology guided by restraint stays useful longer. Greek fire rests, the bronze tubes remain secured, and the ships continue their gentle movement across the water. Nothing presses forward. Nothing pulls back. In this empire, even technology knows how to slow down. And in that slow, steady rhythm, everything remains exactly as it should be. A battle that does not need noise. As the hour drifts past the halfway point, the sea settles into a familiar pattern. Waves move with their usual patience. The horizon remains level. Nothing about the scene suggests urgency, and that is precisely the point. When Greek fire is used at sea, it arrives without ceremony and leaves without a story to tell. There are no cheers, no raised voices, no dramatic pauses. The sailors do what they always do. They pull ropes with steady hands, the fibers rough but familiar. They shift their weight to keep balance as the deck responds gently to the water. They glance at the wind, not as an enemy or a challenge, but as a co-worker whose mood must be respected. Everything feels routine. On these ships, routine is comforting. It keeps hands busy and minds calm. The presence of Greek fire does not change that rhythm. It fits into it like another tool stored nearby, waiting for its turn without impatience. When the moment comes, no one announces it. There is no signal beyond a nod or a brief look. Movements remain economical. Each action follows the next, with the same calm order practiced countless times before. Someone adjusts a rope, someone steadies a fitting, someone checks the angle of the ship in relation to the breeze. No one rushes, no one lingers. Greek fire is used quietly, as though it understands that this is not the time for performance. It behaves exactly as intended, neither demanding attention nor refusing it. Then, just as quietly, it is finished. The sailors do not stop working afterward. They do not pause to admire anything. They return to their tasks without comment. A rope still needs coiling. A sail still needs watching. The sea has not changed its mind about being the sea. From a distance, an observer might miss the entire event. It blends into the ongoing activity of the ship, indistinguishable from any other moment of careful operation. That is intentional. In this tradition, effectiveness is measured by how little it interrupts daily work. If something requires celebration, it likely required too much effort. Greek fire, when used correctly, leaves no need for applause. There is a quiet practicality to how it is treated afterward. The equipment is checked. Any remaining material is secured. Containers are sealed. Everything is returned to its place. Nothing is left out. Nothing is displayed. Someone might crack a soft joke about how anticlimactic it all feels. The joke is brief, understated, and quickly forgotten. Humor here is not sharp. It is rounded at the edges, meant to smooth rather than excite. The sea continues its slow conversation with the hull. The ship responds with gentle creaks. Life aboard resumes its familiar tempo as if nothing unusual has occurred. This is how such moments are remembered, if they are remembered at all. There are no songs written, no embellished accounts passed around later. When reports are made, they are concise. The tool was used. The task was completed. Equipment returned to storage. That is the entire story. Greek fire is never described with flourish. It is not praised. It is not blamed. It simply appears in the record as a functional step, no more dramatic than adjusting a sail or trimming a line. Even the sailors who were closest to the action speak of it plainly. If asked, they might shrug and say, "It worked as expected." Then they change the subject to the weather, which is far more interesting and much more unpredictable. There is a subtle discipline in this restraint. By refusing to exaggerate, the experience remains manageable. It does not grow larger in memory than it was in reality, and reality, in this case, is quiet. Hands remain steady. Breathing remains even. Eyes continue scanning the water, the sky, the subtle signs that sailors learn to read without thinking. Greek fire does not alter the atmosphere of the ship. It does not make the deck feel heavier or the air more tense. It is simply another responsibility, handled and then released. Later, when the equipment is cleaned and secured, there is no sense of relief or triumph, just completion. A task finished properly carries its own satisfaction, and that satisfaction does not need words. One sailor takes a moment to make sure a latch sits correctly. Another adjusts a strap that is twisted slightly. These small actions matter more than anything dramatic ever could. The absence of noise becomes its own kind of success. In the larger rhythm of the voyage, this hour does not stand out. It blends smoothly into the hours before and after it. Meals are eaten, watches are kept. The ship moves on. This approach keeps memories from becoming heavy. Nothing lingers, nothing echoes. The empire that developed this practice understands something subtle. Noise invites interpretation, and interpretation invites distortion. Silence, on the other hand, preserves accuracy. Greek fire, once stored again, returns to being potential rather than presence. It waits without complaint. It does not insist on relevance. The sailors too seem relieved by this normalcy. They prefer the predictable motions of daily work to anything that might demand reflection or retelling. If someone new asks what it was like, the answer is disappointingly simple. We did our jobs. The conversation ends there. And in that simplicity, calm is maintained. As the hour drifts toward its close, the sea remains unchanged. The sky shifts color almost imperceptibly. The ship continues forward, guided by experience rather than excitement. Greek fire rests below deck, properly secured, its moment already finished and quietly forgotten. This is a battle without noise, not because nothing happens, but because everything happens exactly as planned. No more, no less. And in that steady, uneventful precision, the ship moves on, balanced, attentive, and entirely untroubled by the need to make history sound louder than it truly was. Secrets preserved through habit. As the hour turns past the midpoint, everything settles into an even deeper calm. This is the part of the story where nothing dramatic needs to happen at all. In fact, the less that happens, the better things seem to work. The Empire has learned this over time, and it practices the lesson with impressive consistency. The formula for Greek fire is never written down, not on parchment, not on tablets, not hidden in clever codes or sealed in ornate boxes. It simply does not exist in written form. And yet, the process itself is everywhere, moving quietly through hands, routines, and habits that repeat day after day. Here, memory does the work of ink. The process is repeated so often that it no longer feels like instruction. It becomes reflex. Hands reach for the correct container without looking. Measurements happen without counting out loud. Timing is felt rather than tracked. The body remembers what the mind does not need to question. This repetition is not hurried. It is calm, almost leisurely. The people involved have nowhere else to be. They are not racing time, they are cooperating with it. Only a small number of families within the empire know how to prepare the mixture properly. This knowledge is not announced, nor is it hidden behind heavy doors. It is simply kept within households, passed along the same way any specialized trade might be. A father shows a son how to prepare materials. A mother corrects a small detail without comment. An older relative watches quietly from the corner, nodding when things look right. No speeches are given. No solemn vows are taken. It feels, in many ways, like learning how to bake a dependable loaf of bread or repair a familiar tool. The work is treated as ordinary, and that ordinariness is precisely what keeps the secret intact. When something feels special, people talk about it. When something feels routine, they forget to mention it at all. These families do not consider themselves guardians of a great mystery. They consider themselves workers doing a job that needs to be done correctly and consistently. Pride is quiet. Satisfaction comes from smooth repetition, not recognition. Children grow up watching the process long before they participate. At first, they are simply present, sweeping floors, carrying small items, refilling lamps. Over time, they absorb the rhythm. By the time they are taught directly, much of the learning has already happened without anyone noticing. Instructions are brief, corrections are gentle. A little less. Wait a moment longer. That one goes back on the shelf. These phrases are spoken softly, often without stopping the work. No one ever says, "This is a secret." There is no need. Secrets thrive best when they are not named. The absence of written records is not seen as a risk. On the contrary, it is a form of stability. Written words can be copied, misplaced, misunderstood. Habits, once learned deeply enough, are far harder to lose. The empire trusts this approach. It has seen how habits survive fires, relocations, and changes in leadership. As long as the families remain, the process remains. There is something quietly humorous about how unspectacular the whole arrangement is. Outsiders might imagine locked rooms and whispered conspiracies. In reality, the work happens in well-lit spaces, during regular hours, with breaks for meals and casual conversation. Someone might pause to stretch their back. Someone else might comment on the weather. The mixture waits patiently. It does not mind being interrupted briefly. It knows it will be resumed. This lack of urgency keeps mistakes rare. When people are calm, they notice small details. When they notice small details, they adjust naturally. The families involved live ordinary lives outside their work. They attend gatherings. They argue about small things. They complain about aching joints and celebrate good harvests. Nothing about them marks them as extraordinary. And that is exactly why the secret stays where it is. The process is never isolated from daily life. It fits into it neatly, like a well-designed tool that slides back into its place when not needed. There is no ceremony when the work begins and no announcement when it ends. One family elder is known for saying, "If it feels important, you're thinking about it too much." This phrase becomes something of a quiet guideline, passed along with a smile. Humor surfaces gently in these spaces. Someone jokes that the mixture behaves better when it is not being watched too closely. Another remarks that it seems to prefer people who are in no hurry. These comments are not meant seriously, but they reinforce the same habit. Stay calm, stay consistent. Over the decades, the routine barely changes. Small adjustments are made, but they are absorbed seamlessly into the existing rhythm. No one marks the moment when a change becomes permanent. It simply does. This continuity gives the work a peculiar sense of timelessness. A person might step into a workshop after years away and find everything comfortingly familiar. The shelves are arranged the same way, the tools feel the same in the hand, the timing still feels right. Knowledge passes not through explanation, but through presence. Being there matters more than being told. Watching matters more than reading. Doing matters more than remembering words. The Empire understands that habits are stronger than rules. Rules require enforcement. Habits require only time. Because the secret is never emphasized, it never attracts attention. There is nothing for outsiders to chase, nothing to demand. Even those aware that something exists cannot quite grasp where it lives. It lives in mornings that start the same way, in tasks done without thinking, in movements repeated so often they become invisible. When someone from outside asks about the process, the answer is always understated. It's just the way we do it. No elaboration follows. The conversation drifts elsewhere. This approach keeps curiosity low and confidence high. There is no temptation to show off. Showing off would disrupt the rhythm, and disruption is deeply unfashionable here. As the years roll forward, generations overlap. Older hands guide younger ones, then slowly step back. The work continues uninterrupted, like a tune hummed quietly by different voices over time. There is no fear that the secret will be lost. Loss usually comes from neglect or panic, and neither has a place in this environment. Everything is attended to calmly and consistently. Even when circumstances change, the habit adapts without strain. The core remains the same, the steps remain familiar, the order remains intact. In this way, the secret survives not because it is protected fiercely, but because it is treated gently. It is not locked away. It is lived. As this hour draws to a close, the scene remains almost unchanged from where it began. Lamps burn steadily. Tools rest where they belong. People move with unhurried confidence. The formula remains unwritten. The process remains alive. And the secret continues to exist precisely because no one insists on calling it one. When other powers begin to observe. As this hour opens, the pace remains unhurried, almost deliberately so. Somewhere beyond familiar waters, attention begins to gather. Other kingdoms notice patterns. They notice outcomes. They notice that something works quietly and consistently, and curiosity drifts in like a polite visitor who is not quite sure where to sit. Observation comes first. From a distance, ships are watched. Movements are noted. Timing is guessed at. Nothing obvious reveals itself, but that rarely stops anyone from trying. Across different coasts and courts, people begin to look a little more closely than before. They do not rush toward imitation. Not yet. They watch. Reports travel slowly, carried by merchants, sailors, and envoys who describe what they have seen with careful neutrality. The descriptions are vague. It seemed effective. It appeared controlled. There was no disorder. These are not the kinds of details that make copying easy. Still, observation turns into effort. Workshops in other kingdoms begin quiet experiments of their own. Lamps are lit, containers are arranged. Someone suggests a mixture, someone else adjusts it. There is patience, but it is a different kind of patience, one that expects results sooner rather than later. They try to replicate what they believe they understand. What they do not have, however, is the same sea. The Mediterranean behaves in its own way. Its winds are familiar to those who grow up beside them. Its currents have personalities learned over years, not charts. Those who work upon it develop instincts that cannot be borrowed. Other coasts offer different lessons. Tides behave differently. Weather shifts with another rhythm. The water itself seems to respond in unfamiliar ways. Small differences accumulate quietly, changing outcomes without announcing themselves. Climate plays its part as well. Materials stored in one place behave differently in another. Heat lingers longer, moisture arrives uninvited. Dry air alters textures. Subtle changes influence processes that rely on steadiness. Those attempting to copy the mixture notice inconsistencies. Something works one day and behaves differently the next. Adjustments multiply. Notes grow longer. Frustration remains politely unspoken but quietly present. And then there is culture. In the empire where Greek fire originated, patience is not a virtue to be praised. It is an expectation. Work is allowed to take time. Repetition is respected. Silence is productive. Elsewhere, habits differ. Some workshops favor innovation over routine. Others reward speed. Some value written instruction above all else. These approaches are not wrong, they are simply different. And difference matters more than anyone initially expects. Imitation proves difficult, not because of missing ingredients, but because of missing rhythms. Observers notice that the original system rarely hurries. They notice that preparation often takes longer than use. They notice that nothing is emphasized or celebrated. These observations are correct, but incomplete. What they cannot easily see is how deeply these habits are embedded. They are not techniques, they are assumptions. They shape decisions before anyone realizes a decision has been made. Attempts to replicate Greek fire often focus on the mixture itself. Ratios are debated, containers redesigned, delivery methods adjusted. Each effort inches closer in appearance, but not in reliability. The missing element is not dramatic. It is mundane. It is the habit of waiting until the moment is right, even when that moment looks very much like the moment before it. In the empire, this waiting feels natural. Elsewhere, it feels inefficient. Observers also notice the lack of storytelling around the technology. There are no grand demonstrations, no exaggerated accounts, nothing to amplify or mythologize. This absence makes understanding harder. Without stories, people rely on guesses. Some kingdoms attempt to accelerate learning by expanding teams. More people, more trials, more notes. The activity level increases. The results do not improve. Others try secrecy. They restrict access. They isolate specialists. This produces tension rather than clarity. The work becomes important, and importance adds pressure. Pressure disrupts consistency. A few observers eventually realize that Greek fire is not merely a product. It is an outcome. It emerges from a system that values calm repetition, environmental familiarity, and shared expectations. Remove any one of these, and the outcome changes quietly but decisively. The empire itself does not react to these external efforts. It does not correct misunderstandings. It does not offer guidance. It simply continues its routines, unconcerned with who might be watching. This lack of response is not strategic. It is habitual. From the inside, there is nothing to explain. The work functions as intended. The system supports it. Life continues. There is gentle humor in how observers misinterpret stillness as simplicity. They assume that because something is quiet, it must be easy to reproduce. They learn gradually that quiet often hides complexity built over time. Some experiments come close enough to raise hopes, close enough to justify further effort. Then small variations appear and reliability fades. The conclusion arrives slowly, not as an admission but as a recognition. The conditions cannot be fully recreated. Not the sea, not the climate, not the culture of patience that allows repetition without boredom. Greek fire in this understanding becomes less mysterious and more contextual. It belongs where it was shaped. It behaves best among familiar rhythms. This realization does not end experimentation. Curiosity rarely stops entirely, but it tempers expectations. Imitation gives way to adaptation. Other kingdoms develop their own approaches, influenced but not duplicated. These efforts follow their own rhythms, suited to their own environments. The empire, meanwhile, continues to live slowly. Its system does not tighten or expand in response to attention. It does not accelerate to stay ahead. It does not react at all. Reaction would disrupt balance. Those who observe most closely eventually notice this as well. The strength lies not in guarding the secret, but in not rearranging life around it. Greek fire remains effective because it is supported by a broader structure that values steadiness over spectacle. In this way, it becomes clear that the mixture itself is only one layer. Beneath it lies a way of working that cannot be shipped, copied, or rushed. As this hour draws toward its close, observation continues from afar. Attempts persist. Understanding deepens incrementally, and the quiet truth settles in gently. Greek fire is not simply made, it is grown over time within a system that moves at its own pace, a system that does not hurry to be understood, a system that, by remaining slow, remains itself. Fire as a quiet part of the city. As this hour unfolds, the focus drifts away from ships and workshops and settles gently into the city itself. Constantinople wakes, stretches, and continues with its familiar routines. Stone streets warm under the morning light. Doors open. Footsteps echo softly, then fade. Nothing about the city suggests that it holds anything unusual. Greek fire is here, but it is not a topic of conversation. In the markets, people talk about bread. They discuss which baker's loaves are still warm, which stall has raised prices by a single coin, and which vendor insists that today's olives are better than yesterday's. Opinions vary. Voices remain calm. Someone mentions the wind. The breeze coming off the water is cooler than expected. Another person nods and says, "It will probably change by afternoon." This is useful information. It affects sales, laundry, and mood. No one brings up Greek fire. It exists in the city the same way the walls exist, present, reliable, and rarely mentioned. People know it is there, but knowing does not require discussion. Children weave between stalls, focused on errands or mischief of a much smaller scale. They are far more interested in sweet pastries than in anything abstract or powerful. Their priorities are clear and sensible. In workshops, artisans concentrate on their own materials. Metal is shaped, wood is smoothed, fabric is folded. Each trade has its concerns, and none of them involve speaking about the city's strongest tools. The absence of conversation is not enforced. There are no rules against mentioning Greek fire. It simply does not occur to most people to bring it up. There are more immediate matters at hand. Lunch needs planning. Weather needs watching. Shoes need repair. The city has learned over generations that some things function best when they remain in the background. Attention is reserved for daily life, not for what quietly supports it. This habit creates a kind of shared silence, not an empty one, but a comfortable one. It is the silence of familiarity, where everyone understands without needing reminders. Even those directly connected to Greek fire do not speak of it at home. At the dinner table, conversations circle around ordinary topics. Someone complains about a neighbor's noisy rooster. Someone else praises a particularly good stew. The work they do blends seamlessly into the rhythm of the city. When they leave their workshops, they become citizens again, indistinguishable from anyone else. This blending is important. It prevents separation, it prevents elevation, it keeps life even. Visitors to Constantinople often remark on how calm the city feels. Busy, yes. Organized, certainly. But calm in a way that suggests confidence rather than tension. They may sense that something holds the city together, but they cannot quite name it. The streets feel steady. The harbor moves with practiced ease. The walls do not feel anxious. If asked, residents might shrug and say, "The city has always been this way." There is no reason to dramatize stability. Greek fire, in this context, becomes less a weapon and more a condition of assurance. It does not need to be shown or described. Its effectiveness is measured by how little it intrudes into daily thought. The city's strongest advantage is not what it says about itself, but what it does not feel compelled to mention. There is a gentle humor in this collective understatement. Outsiders expect whispers and rumors. Instead, they hear debates about fish prices and complaints about crowded streets. Someone jokes that if a thing is truly important, there is no need to talk about it constantly. The joke lands softly and is forgotten almost immediately, as jokes often are here. The architecture of the city reinforces this attitude. Massive structures coexist with narrow streets. Grand spaces give way to small courtyards. Nothing demands attention for long. Even the harbor, where ships arrive from distant lands, maintains an orderly quiet. Crews unload goods. Records are kept. Instructions are given without shouting. Greek fire remains absent from these exchanges, not because it is hidden, but because it does not belong in them. The city trusts its systems. Trust reduces noise. At night, as lamps flicker along the streets, conversations grow even softer. Footsteps slow. The day releases its grip. The sea breathes steadily beside the walls. Somewhere within the city, Greek fire rests, properly stored, unremarked upon. It does not disrupt sleep. It does not demand vigilance. This relationship, power without preoccupation, shapes the city's character. Constantinople does not lean forward. It does not brace itself. It stands comfortably where it is. In this environment, silence becomes a form of strength. Not the silence of secrecy or fear, but the silence of familiarity. Everyone knows what needs to be known. Nothing else requires amplification. The city's rhythm continues unchanged. Markets close. Doors are barred. Families gather indoors. The wind shifts again, just as predicted. As this hour draws toward its end, the picture remains gentle and intact. Greek fire exists as part of the city's infrastructure, not its identity. What defines Constantinople is not what it possesses, but how naturally it lives with what it possesses. The strongest element here is not flame, but habit. Not noise, but quiet understanding. And in that understanding, the city rests, steady, unhurried, and entirely at ease with its own silence. The shift of time. As this hour begins, time itself seems to stretch and adjust, like a well-worn garment altered slightly to fit a new season. The world around the empire does not stand still, and neither does the empire itself. Change arrives quietly, without announcement, and settles in gradually, just as it always has. By the 10th century, the rhythm of life feels different, not faster, not slower, simply rearranged. Ships still move across familiar waters. Walls still stand where they always have. But habits shift, almost without anyone noticing the exact moment when they do. Greek fire remains part of the imperial world, yet it begins to occupy less space in everyday thought. This is not because it has stopped working. On the contrary, it works exactly as it always has. Reliable tools rarely change. What changes instead is the context around them. The empire grows accustomed to other forms of defense. Fortifications are improved. Naval coordination becomes smoother. Communication grows more refined. Systems overlap and reinforce one another, reducing the need to rely heavily on any single method. Greek fire becomes one element among many, no longer central, but still present. In the 10th century, this feels natural. There is no announcement that its role has shifted, no decision recorded. It simply becomes less frequent, less discussed, less prominent. People adjust without effort. Military planning emphasizes flexibility rather than reliance. Defense becomes layered, like clothing chosen carefully for unpredictable weather. One method supports another. Nothing carries the full weight alone. Greek fire fits comfortably into this approach. It no longer stands out, it blends. Records from this period mention it only briefly, if at all. Not because it is forgotten, but because it has become familiar. Familiar things rarely demand description. Those responsible for maintaining the knowledge continue their routines. Habits remain intact. The process is repeated. The families involved carry on their work calmly, even if it is called upon less often. Less use does not mean neglect. Storage remains careful. Training continues. Skills are passed on. The difference lies only in frequency, not in attention. By the 11th century, the empire faces a world that feels more complex, not more threatening. Trade routes shift. Alliances change. New neighbors appear. Old ones adopt different strategies. Defense evolves in response, not through urgency, but through refinement. Greek fire becomes part of institutional memory rather than daily practice. It is known, trusted, and kept in reserve. Reserve here is not a sign of doubt, but of maturity. There is a quiet humor in how this transition unfolds. Something once regarded with intense focus now rests politely in the background, like a well-trained helper who no longer needs supervision. No one worries about this change. No one feels nostalgic. Nostalgia would suggest loss, and nothing has been lost. Instead, there is a sense of continuity. The empire has learned to adjust without discarding what still works. Technologies, like habits, age gracefully when allowed to do so. They do not need reinvention. They need appropriate placement. Greek fire finds its place among other defenses, neither leading nor disappearing. It becomes part of a broader conversation that does not require frequent speaking. In workshops, the same calm persists. Lamps burn steadily. Movements remain practiced. The pace does not change just because demand has softened. The people involved are not concerned about relevance. Relevance comes and goes. Consistency remains. Outside these spaces, daily life continues uninterrupted. Markets buzz, streets fill and empty, seasons shift gently. The city adapts to new rhythms without strain. This adaptability becomes one of the empire's greatest strengths. It does not cling to tools simply because they once mattered more. It does not abandon them simply because attention has moved elsewhere. Balance replaces emphasis. Greek fire in this era feels almost comfortable with its reduced visibility. It has never sought attention. It has always preferred proper use over frequent use. The empire, now more experienced, shares this preference. Defense strategies expand and contract naturally. Naval practices become more standardized. Fortifications rely on planning rather than reaction. Coordination replaces spectacle. Greek fire supports this environment by remaining dependable but unobtrusive. Observers from outside sometimes misinterpret this quiet shift. They assume disappearance where there is only integration. They expect innovation to look loud and change to feel dramatic. Inside the empire, nothing feels dramatic at all. Change arrives like a new arrangement of furniture. The room remains the same. Movement simply flows a little differently. By the late 11th century, Greek fire occupies a clear, settled role. It is no longer a defining feature of defense. It is one option among many, chosen when appropriate and ignored when unnecessary. This does not diminish its value. It clarifies it. The empire has learned that strength lies not in reliance but in range. Having multiple approaches reduces strain. It allows patience. Greek fire remains patient. Those who maintain the knowledge do not lament its quieter role. They understand cycles. They understand that attention moves but habit endures. The secret remains intact, not because it is guarded fiercely, but because it continues to be treated normally. And normality, once again, proves to be the most reliable protection. As this hour gently concludes, the picture feels settled. The world has shifted. The empire has shifted with it. Technology has followed suit, not by transforming itself, but by accepting a new position. Greek fire rests comfortably within a wider system, neither spotlighted nor forgotten. Time moves on, and the empire, steady and unhurried, moves with it, carrying forward not just tools, but the calm understanding of when to use them and when to let them remain quietly where they belong. When the secret is no longer necessary. As this hour begins, the sense of time feels especially soft, as though the past has settled into a comfortable chair and decided to stay for a while. There is no sharp turning point here, no clear line drawn on a calendar. Instead, change drifts in quietly, almost politely, and takes its place without asking for attention. There is no official moment when Greek fire is declared finished. No announcement is made, no final entry is written. It simply begins to appear less often, like a familiar routine that slowly fades from daily life without anyone noticing the exact day it stopped. This happens not because Greek fire fails, but because it is no longer needed in the same way. The empire does not abandon it in frustration. It does not reject it as outdated. Rather, it moves on calmly, the way people do when they discover new habits that fit better with how life now unfolds. At first, the change is almost imperceptible. The intervals between use grow longer, training sessions are held less frequently, equipment remains stored and checked, but not requested. No one comments on this. There is no concern. Everything feels orderly. Greek fire becomes something that exists in memory more than in practice. Those who once worked with it continue their routines for a time, then gradually shift their attention to other responsibilities. Their skills do not vanish. They simply rest, like muscles not called upon every day. The families who carried the knowledge do not treat this shift as a loss. To them, it feels natural. Trades change, needs evolve, work adapts. They continue to pass on habits, though sometimes these habits become more general, principles of patience, repetition, and care, rather than specific procedures. This is how traditions transform without breaking. The secret does not disappear. It dissolves into everyday competence. In workshops, tools once used for preparation remain on shelves, still clean, still familiar. They are not discarded. They are respected. Occasionally, someone handles them with a nod of recognition, then sets them back. The absence of use does not create emptiness. It creates space. Defense systems now rely on different arrangements. Coordination improves. Infrastructure strengthens. Planning becomes more predictive. The empire leans into systems that favor organization over individual solutions. Greek fire fits less often into this picture, not because it conflicts, but because it is no longer central. The change feels almost humorous in its gentleness. Something that once demanded such careful handling now waits patiently without complaint, as though it understands it has done its work well. No one feels the need to mark its passing. Life in the city continues with the same calm priorities. Markets open, ships arrive, conversations remain focused on practical matters. Greek fire fades from public awareness, not because it is hidden, but because it is irrelevant to daily concerns. Even within the institutions that once depended on it, the shift is gradual. Manuals are updated, training focuses elsewhere. Old knowledge remains, but it no longer takes up space at the center of attention. This is how secrets end, not with exposure, but with indifference. When something is no longer required, it stops being protected actively. It simply blends into the background of what is known but unused. The empire does not fear this. It trusts its ability to adapt. There is a certain peace in this stage. Nothing is being defended desperately. Nothing is being preserved out of nostalgia. Everything moves according to need. Greek fire becomes part of the empire's long memory. It is something that once solved a problem and now rests as an example of how problems were solved in their time. In this sense, it has succeeded completely. The habits that sustained it, patience, restraint, repetition, remain alive even as the specific practice fades. These habits migrate into other areas of life, influencing new systems in subtle ways. What mattered most was never the formula. It was the way people worked together calmly and consistently. As years pass, references grow rarer. A mention here, a note there, nothing more. No one searches for the lost secret. There is no sense of mystery demanding resolution. The absence feels appropriate. Occasionally, someone younger hears about Greek fire as a historical curiosity. The story is told plainly without embellishment. It sounds practical, almost mundane. That's how they did it then, someone says. The conversation moves on. The lack of drama keeps the past from becoming heavy. It remains informative rather than imposing. In this stage, Greek fire is no longer an active presence, but neither is it erased. It occupies a comfortable middle ground, remembered, understood, and quietly respected. This balance reflects the empire's broader approach to change. Nothing is rushed, nothing is clung to unnecessarily. Old habits give way to new ones without conflict. The secret no longer needs protection because it no longer carries urgency. It does not threaten imbalance, it does not promise advantage. It simply exists as part of a long sequence of solutions that have come and gone. As this hour approaches its end, the mood remains steady and light. There is even a touch of gentle humor in how easily something once so carefully maintained can step aside without protest. Greek fire does not demand remembrance. It does not ask to be revived. It rests, content in the knowledge that it belonged exactly where it was needed, exactly when it was needed. Time moves forward, carrying new habits into place. And in that movement, the secret becomes unnecessary, not because it failed, but because the world found other ways to move calmly through its challenges. The empire continues, unhurried, adaptable, and quietly confident, just as it always has. Fire returning to quiet. As the final hour arrives, everything slows to its most comfortable pace. The story no longer moves forward. It settles. Like a city at night that has finished its work for the day, there is nothing left to organize, nothing left to prepare. Only presence remains. Today, Greek fire exists only in books and in the careful memory of history. It no longer burns. It is no longer mixed. No lamps are lit for it. No containers are labeled. No hands considerationately measure and wait. And this absence feels perfectly appropriate. Greek fire does not vanish suddenly. It simply becomes still. Its activity ends without ceremony, without regret, without anyone needing to tidy up afterward. It leaves behind no smoke, no lingering urgency, no sense of unfinished business. What remains is an image rather than a tool. an image of an empire that understood timing, that knew how to wait, that knew how to keep something quietly useful without talking about it too much, and perhaps most impressively, that knew when to stop using it at all. In historical texts, Greek fire appears calmly, usually without flourish. A paragraph here, a mention there. It is treated as a practical solution from a practical time, not as a miracle or a mystery demanding dramatic retelling. Readers encounter it the same way the empire once did, without excitement, without exaggeration, and without pressure to react. This tone is consistent. The empire does not rewrite its own story to sound louder than it was. It allows the past to remain calm, orderly, and suitably understated. In this way, Greek fire returns fully to silence, not forgotten, just resting. The knowledge that once lived in habits and routines now lives in pages. Descriptions replace practice, explanation replaces repetition. This shift feels natural, as though the knowledge itself has decided to retire politely. There is no sense of loss in this transition. Tools come and go. Methods evolve. What matters is not permanence, but usefulness at the right moment. Greek fire fulfilled its moment. The families who once passed down its routines fade gently into the broader flow of history. Their skills merge into other trades, other disciplines, other quiet competencies. The patience they practiced continues elsewhere, in different forms, applied to new problems with the same calm attention. What survives is not the mixture, but the mindset, the ability to wait, the ability to repeat, the ability to stop. These qualities linger long after the last container is sealed and set aside. And so, Greek fire becomes something entirely peaceful. It no longer needs guarding. No one needs to protect its secret. There is nothing left to misuse or misunderstand. Silence finishes what restraint began. There is a soft humor in how anticlimactic this ending is. After centuries of careful handling, the conclusion is simply quiet, no final demonstration, no ceremonial farewell, just a gradual settling into irrelevance. History, it turns out, is quite good at letting things drift into rest. In modern imagination, Constantinople appears again, reconstructed gently in the mind. The city sits beside the sea as it always has. Walls catch the last light of the day. The water moves slowly, unbothered by time. Greek fire does not flicker anywhere in this image, and nothing feels missing. The harbor breathes calmly, ships rock with familiar patience, streets wind through neighborhoods where daily life once unfolded without urgency. The city does not lean forward, it does not brace itself, it simply exists. Wind moves lightly across the water, doing exactly what wind prefers to do. It carries no message, it asks no questions. It is content to pass through and move on. The city in this imagined night does not feel the need to prove anything. Its strongest moments are already behind it, and it does not replay them loudly. It rests in the knowledge that it once knew how to wait, and that waiting served it well. Greek fire, now entirely quiet, belongs to this same stillness. It is not a legend roaring through time. It is a footnote with excellent posture, a reminder that strength does not always announce itself. that effectiveness does not require repetition. That sometimes the most complete ending is one where nothing dramatic happens at all. As the night deepens over Constantinople in imagination, lights dim gradually, conversations fade, the city settles into its familiar shape, held together by stone, habit, and memory. No flame rises, no secret stirs, and everything feels exactly as it should. The story ends not with noise, but with rest. A long, steady rest. And in that rest, Greek fire finally returns to what it was always best at: being quiet